Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched as the massive space station came into view. The Zephyrian Academy of Interstellar Sciences looked like a giant crystal floating in the darkness of space. Bright lights sparkled from thousands of windows and long corridors stretched out like arms reaching toward the stars. "Would you look at that?" whispered Lisa Wang from the seat beside him. Her eyes were wide with wonder as she stared at the academy. "I can't believe we're actually here." Connor Blake leaned over from across the aisle, his red hair messy from the long journey. "My dad said this place has been training the best minds in the galaxy for over 500 years, and now they're letting humans in for the first time." Jake nodded but felt his stomach twist with nervousness. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago. Before that, most alien species didn't even know humans existed. Now here, they were 3 human students about to study alongside the smartest beings from 12 different worlds. The transport ship docked with a soft bump, and Jake grabbed his small backpack. Inside was everything he owned that mattered for this trip, including a special terrarium that he had been extra careful with during the journey. He could feel the other passengers looking at him and his friends with curiosity. Most of them were much larger than humans with strange skin colors and odd-shaped heads. As they walked through the docking tunnel, Jake saw his first Zephyrian up close. The alien was tall and thin, almost see-through like it was made of glass. When it spoke, the words came out as musical sounds that Jake's translation device turned into normal speech. "Welcome to the Academy, young beings," the Zephyrian said. "I am Assistant Administrator Veltara. Please follow me to the orientation hall." The 3 humans walked behind Veltara through corridors that seemed to glow with their own light. Other students passed by in groups, talking in languages that sounded like nothing Jake had ever heard. Some of the aliens were huge and covered in what looked like natural armor. Others moved so fast they were just blurs of color. "Look at them all," Lisa whispered. "They're so different from each other." "And they're all staring at us," Connor added quietly. Jake noticed it too. Every alien student they passed stopped to look at the humans. Some pointed and made sounds. That might have been laughter. Others just stared with expressions that Jake couldn't read. The orientation hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high that Jake couldn't see the top. Hundreds of students sat in sections based on their species. The humans were given seats in a small area marked with Earth's symbol, a simple blue and green circle. A massive Zephyrian stepped up to speak at the front of the hall. This one was different from the others, older-looking somehow, with patterns of light that moved slowly across its crystal-like body. "I am Dean Morthak," the being announced, its voice echoing through the hall. "Today we welcome new students from 12 worlds to begin their advanced studies. Each species brings knowledge and wisdom from their home planet." Jake felt excited as he listened. This was really happening. He was going to learn things that no human had ever learned before. "As is our tradition," Dean Morthak continued, "each species will present a specimen from their world. This allows us to understand the evolutionary path that created your intelligence." Jake's excitement quickly turned to worry. He looked down at his backpack, where his terrarium waited. Inside was a small jumping spider that he had carefully caught in his backyard in Colorado. The spider was barely bigger than a coin with fuzzy legs and big eyes. Jake had named him Scout because of how carefully the little spider always looked around before jumping. The presentations began with the Krathari, the heavily armored aliens who looked like walking tanks. Their representative, a student named Vextar, stood up slowly. Even sitting down, he was taller than Jake. When Vextar stood, he towered over everyone else in the hall. Vextar placed a large metal box on the presentation table. When he opened it, gasps echoed through the hall. Inside was a beetle the size of a small car, with thick armor plating and mandibles that dripped with acid. The creature hissed and clicked its jaws together, making sounds like metal grinding against metal. "This is a Krathari war beetle," Vextar announced proudly. "It can bite through steel and spit acid that melts rock. Our world's predators made us strong." The alien students clapped and made various sounds of approval. Jake felt his confidence shrinking as he looked at the terrifying beetle, then down at his tiny spider. Next came the Veloxians, who moved so fast that Jake could barely follow them with his eyes. Their student placed a sleek metal cage on the table and opened it carefully. Out stepped what looked like a cross between a large cat and a lizard, but it moved with impossible speed. In the blink of an eye, it had crossed the entire presentation. Area 3 times. The Veloxian hunter cat, the student explained, speaking so quickly that Jake's translator struggled to keep up. It can run faster than sound and catch prey that cannot be seen by normal eyes. More applause filled the hall. Jake noticed that some students were now looking toward the human section with what seemed like pity. The Zephyrians presented last. Among the major species, their specimen wasn't really alive in the way Jake understood life. It was a crystal creature that looked like a small version of the Zephyrians themselves. But this one could bend light around itself, becoming invisible, and then reappear in brilliant flashes of color. The Zephyrian Light Dancer, their student announced. It controls electromagnetic radiation and can become one with energy itself. The hall erupted in the loudest applause yet. Jake's hands were sweating now as he realized his turn was coming up. Lisa reached over and squeezed his arm. "You'll be fine," she whispered, but even she looked worried. "Now we welcome our newest members," Dean Morthak announced. "The humans of Earth will present their specimen." Jake stood up on shaky legs and walked to the front of the hall. The weight of hundreds of alien eyes on him made each step feel difficult. He placed his small terrarium on the presentation table, and it looked incredibly tiny next to the spaces where the other creatures had been displayed. Jake opened the terrarium carefully and gently coaxed Scout onto his hand. The little jumping spider sat calmly on Jake's palm, looking around the hall with his 8 tiny eyes. The hall fell completely silent for a moment. Then the laughter started. It began as quiet chuckles from a few students but quickly grew louder. Soon most of the hall was filled with various sounds that Jake's translator told him were expressions of amusement and disbelief. Some aliens were pointing at Scout and making gestures that clearly meant the spider was impossibly small. "That's it?" called out a Veloxian student. "That tiny thing?" "It's smaller than my claw," laughed a Krathari. Even some of the Zephyrians were making their musical sounds of amusement. Jake felt his face turn red, but he tried to speak loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a jumping spider from Earth," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "His name is Scout, and he's actually amazing. He can jump 50 times his own body length. He has 8 eyes that can see in almost every direction, and he's really smart for his size." The laughter got louder. Someone in the back shouted, "How can something so small be dangerous?" Vextar stood up from his seat, his massive frame casting a shadow over Jake. "Human," Vextar said in a deep voice that rumbled through the hall. "My people have a saying. The strength of a warrior is measured by the strength of his weapons. What does this tiny creature say about your species?" More laughter filled the hall. Jake looked around at all the alien faces staring at him with amusement and what looked like disappointment. He gently placed Scout back in the terrarium and walked back to his seat, his face burning with embarrassment. As he sat down, he could hear aliens throughout the hall still chuckling and making comments about the tiny Earth spider and the weak humans. Lisa and Connor tried to comfort him, but Jake barely heard their words. He looked down at Scout, who was calmly exploring his terrarium as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry, little guy," Jake whispered. "I know you're special, even if they don't." Dean Morthak called for order and began explaining the Academy's rules and schedules, but Jake wasn't really listening anymore. He was wondering if coming to the Academy had been a huge mistake. How could he prove that Earth deserved to be part of the galactic community when even his best specimen was nothing but a joke to everyone else? Scout looked up at him through the glass of the terrarium, and Jake could swear the little spider was trying to tell him something with those bright, intelligent eyes. The next morning, Jake woke up in his small dormitory room feeling terrible. He had barely slept because he kept thinking about the laughter from the orientation hall. Scout was already awake in his terrarium, sitting perfectly still but somehow looking alert, with all 8 of his tiny eyes. "At least you don't seem bothered by it," Jake said softly to the spider as he got dressed. When Jake met Lisa and Connor for breakfast in the main dining hall, he could feel alien students staring at them from every table. As they walked past, with their food trays, Jake heard whispers and saw pointing fingers. "Just ignore them," Lisa said as they sat down at an empty table. "They'll get bored and move on to something else." But Connor shook his head. "I don't think so. Look over there." Jake turned to see a group of Krathari students huddled around a holographic display. The display showed a giant image of Scout next to the massive war beetle from yesterday. The mighty size difference looked even more ridiculous in the hologram, and the Krathari were making their deep rumbling sounds that meant they found something very funny. "They've been showing that to everyone who walks by," Connor said quietly. "I've seen at least 5 different groups looking at it this morning." Jake felt his appetite disappear. He pushed his food around on his plate while trying to ignore the sounds of alien laughter from around the dining hall. Their first class was something called Advanced Combat Theory, taught by Professor Zalthanoon, a tall Zephyrian with silver patterns flowing across his crystal body. The classroom was huge, with seats arranged in a circle around a central area that could project holograms. When Jake, Lisa, and Connor walked in, the alien students who were already there stopped talking and stared. Jake heard one Veloxian whisper to another, "Those are the humans with the tiny spider." Professor Zalthanoon floated into the center of the room, his body glowing softly. "Today we begin studying combat applications of biological advantages," he announced. "Each species has evolved different strengths for survival." The professor activated a holographic display that showed various alien creatures in fighting poses. Jake recognized the war beetle and the hunter cat from yesterday, along with several other impressive-looking creatures. Combat in the modern galaxy requires understanding how biological evolution creates natural weapons, Professor Zalthanoon continued. Size, speed, armor, venom, camouflage. These are the tools that separate predators from prey. A Krathari student raised one of his massive arms. "Professor, what about species that evolved without proper natural weapons? How do they survive?" Several students turned to look directly at Jake. He felt his face getting hot again. Professor Zalthanoon's patterns shifted to what Jake was learning meant thoughtfulness among Zephyrians. "An interesting question, Carthel. Perhaps some species simply were fortunate enough to evolve on worlds without serious threats. They would need to rely on the protection of stronger species for survival." More staring. Jake wanted to disappear into his seat. "But Professor," called out a Veloxian student, "doesn't that make them weak? How can they contribute to galactic society if they cannot even defend themselves?" "Another excellent question, Zixara," the professor replied. "This is something the Galactic Council is still determining." Jake felt like everyone in the room was talking about humans without actually saying the word. He looked over at Lisa and Connor, who both looked as uncomfortable as he felt. After class, Jake was putting his books away when a shadow fell over his desk. He looked up to see Vextar, the massive Krathari student, standing over him. Up close, Vextar was even more intimidating. His natural armor was scarred and dented, and his eyes were small but sharp. "Human," Vextar said in his deep, rumbling voice. "I have been thinking about your presentation yesterday." "Oh," Jake managed to say, "Okay." "Where I come from, we have a tradition," Vextar continued. "When a warrior presents a weapon, others may challenge its effectiveness. I wish to challenge your spider." Jake felt his heart start beating faster. "Challenge? What do you mean?" Other students had stopped packing up their things and were listening now. Vextar seemed to enjoy the attention. "The Academy has combat simulation facilities," Vextar explained. "Students can test their abilities against each other using biomechanical enhancement suits. I challenge you to prove that your tiny creature has any value at all." "I don't think that's a good idea," Jake said quickly. "Scout is just a regular spider. He's not meant for fighting." Vextar made a sound that Jake's translator said was contemptuous laughter. "Of course. The human admits his creature is useless." "I didn't say useless," Jake protested, but his voice came out weaker than he wanted. "Then prove it," Vextar said loudly enough for the whole classroom to hear. Meet me in Combat Arena 7 tomorrow at midday. Bring your spider. I will show everyone the difference between a real warrior's creature and a pet." The other students started making excited sounds. Jake realized that word of this challenge would spread through the entire academy within hours. "What if I say no?" Jake asked. Vextar's small eyes seemed to glitter. "Then everyone will know that humans are too weak even to try. Perhaps the Galactic Council made a mistake inviting Earth to join civilized society." Jake felt trapped. If he accepted the challenge, Scout would probably be hurt or killed. If he refused, it would prove to everyone that humans didn't belong at the academy. "Fine," Jake heard himself saying. "Tomorrow at midday." Vextar nodded with satisfaction and walked away. Immediately, other students crowded around Jake, all talking at once in their various languages. Jake couldn't understand most of what they were saying, but he caught enough words to know they were excited about watching the challenge. Lisa and Connor pushed through the crowd to reach him. "Jake, what were you thinking?" Lisa asked as they hurried out of the classroom. "I don't know," Jake replied honestly. I couldn't let him say humans don't belong here." "But it's just Scout," Connor said. "He's a tiny spider. What's he going to do against whatever Vextar brings?" That afternoon, Jake sat in his room staring at Scout in his terrarium. The little spider was doing what he always did, sitting very still, watching everything with his 8 eyes, occasionally moving to adjust his position slightly. "What am I going to do with you, little guy?" Jake asked. "Everyone thinks you're just a joke." Scout turned toward Jake's voice, which he always did. Jake had noticed that Scout seemed to recognize him and would often orient toward him when he spoke. There was a soft knock on Jake's door. When he opened it, he found Lisa and Connor standing in the hallway. "We've been thinking," Lisa said as they came into his room. "Maybe there's a way to make this work." "How?" Jake asked. "Have you seen the combat arena?" "I looked it up on the Academy network. Students wear these huge mechanical suits that make them 3 times bigger and stronger. Even if I could wear one, what would Scout do?" Connor sat down at Jake's desk. "Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Maybe we shouldn't try to make Scout bigger or stronger." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "Well," Connor said slowly, "what does Scout do better than any of those big creatures?" Jake thought about it. "He's really good at jumping accurately. And he's got great eyesight. And he's smart about hunting." "There you go," Lisa said. "Maybe the challenge isn't about being the biggest or strongest. Maybe it's about being the smartest." "But how do I convince Vextar to change the rules?" Jake asked. "You don't," Connor replied. "You make him think it was his idea." That evening, Jake found Vextar in the Academy's recreation area, surrounded by other Crithari students. Jake's hands were shaking as he approached the group. "Vextar," Jake called out. "I've been thinking about tomorrow." The big alien turned to look at him. "Having second thoughts, human?" "Actually, yes," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "I realized that putting Scout against your war beetle in a straight fight wouldn't prove anything. Of course your beetle would win. It's like comparing a hammer to a spider." Vextar's expression showed confusion. "Then you surrender?" "Not exactly," Jake said. "I was thinking, what if we made it more interesting? What if instead of just fighting, we had a real test of which creature is more effective?" "What kind of test?" one of the other Crithari asked. Jake took a deep breath. "A hunting simulation. Both creatures have to track and capture the same target. Whoever succeeds first wins." Vextar considered this. "Hunting is what separates predators from prey," he said slowly. "Yes, this would be even better. When my beetle captures the target and your spider fails, it will prove that size and strength matter more than anything else." "Great," Jake said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "See you tomorrow." As Jake walked back to his room, he wondered if he had just made things better or much worse. Either way, tomorrow everyone in the Academy would be watching to see if Earth's tiny spider could prove it belonged among the creatures of the galaxy. Scout was waiting for him in the terrarium, as calm and alert as always. Jake had the strange feeling that the little spider somehow understood what was coming. Jake could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about the challenge that was coming in just a few hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vextar's huge war beetle crushing Scout with one bite. He got up from his bed and walked over to the terrarium where Scout was sitting quietly. "What am I doing, Scout?" Jake whispered. "I'm going to get you killed just because I was too proud to back down." Scout seemed to look directly at him with those 8 tiny eyes. Jake had always thought there was something special about the way Scout looked at things, but he had never really paid close attention before. Jake turned on his desk light and pulled up a chair next to the terrarium. If he was going to risk Scout's life tomorrow, he should at least understand what made his little spider tick. "Okay, Scout," Jake said softly. "Show me what you can do." Jake opened a small container and carefully placed a fruit fly inside the terrarium. Scout noticed it immediately, but instead of rushing toward the fly like Jake expected, Scout did something surprising. He moved very slowly to a different spot and then sat completely still. Jake watched, confused. The fruit fly was buzzing around the terrarium, landing on different surfaces. Scout could have easily caught it already, but instead he just waited. His head moved slightly, following the fly's movement, but he did not chase it. "What are you waiting for?" Jake asked quietly. Then Jake saw it. The fruit fly had a pattern to how it moved. It would buzz around for a few seconds, then land and crest, then take off and buzz around again. Scout had figured out this pattern and was positioning himself where the fly would land next. Sure enough, the fruit fly landed exactly where Scout was waiting. In one quick movement, Scout jumped and caught the fly perfectly. No wasted energy, no long chase, just patience and perfect timing. "Wow," Jake breathed. "You're not just hunting. You're thinking." Jake spent the next hour watching Scout hunt 2 more flies. Each time, Scout did the same thing. He watched, he learned the pattern, he positioned himself perfectly, and then he struck with amazing accuracy. Jake pulled out his tablet and started taking notes. He timed Scout's jumps and measured the distances. What he found amazed him. Scout could jump more than 6 inches in a single leap. That might not sound like much, but Scout was only about half an inch long. It was like a human jumping across a football field. But the jumping was not even the most impressive part. Scout's timing was perfect every single time. He seemed to calculate exactly when and where to jump, so that he would meet his target at just the right moment. Jake also noticed Scout's eyes. All 8 of them were constantly moving, looking in different directions. Jake realized that Scout could see almost everything around him at the same time. No wonder he was such a good hunter. "You can see things coming from directions that other creatures can't even imagine," Jake said to Scout. "And you think about what you see instead of just reacting." Jake looked up information about jumping spiders on his tablet. He learned things he had never known before. Jumping spiders had better eyesight than almost any other creature their size. Their brains were incredibly complex for such tiny animals. They could learn, remember, and even plan ahead. Most interesting of all, jumping spiders were ambush predators. They did not chase their prey like most hunters. Instead, they studied their target, figured out where it would go, and then positioned themselves to make one perfect attack. Jake sat back in his chair and thought about this. Every creature at the academy was built for direct confrontation. The war beetles charged straight at their enemies. The hunter cats relied on speed to chase down prey. The crystal creatures used energy blast to overwhelm their targets. But Scout was different. Scout was built for thinking, planning, and precision. There was a soft knock on Jake's door. He looked at his clock and was surprised to see it was almost 3 in the morning. When he opened the door, he found Lisa standing in the hallway in her pajamas. "I saw your light was still on," she said quietly. "I couldn't sleep either. I keep thinking about tomorrow." Jake led her into his room. Lisa looked at the terrarium where Scout was now resting on a small piece of bark. "I've been watching him hunt," Jake said. "Lisa, he's incredible. He's not just catching those flies randomly. He's figuring out their behavior patterns and using strategy." Lisa sat down and looked more closely at Scout. "Really? How can you tell?" Jake showed her his notes and explained what he had observed. Lisa listened with growing excitement. "Jake, this is amazing," she said. "Do you realize what this means? Scout isn't just a regular spider, he's like a tiny military strategist." But will that be enough tomorrow? Jake asked. Vextar's war beetle is huge and covered in armor. Even if Scout is smart, how can he compete with something like that? Lisa was quiet for a moment, thinking. Tell me about the hunting simulation. How exactly does it work? Jake pulled up the information on his tablet. According to this, they create a holographic environment with obstacles and hiding places. Then they put in a target creature that the hunters have to catch. Whoever catches it first wins. What kind of target? Lisa asked. It says here that the target is designed to be challenging for different types of hunters. It can be fast, like a Veloxian creature, strong like a Krathari creature, or tricky like a Zephyrian creature. Lisa smiled. But what if the target is designed to be challenging for big, strong, fast creatures? What if it's not designed to handle a tiny, smart creature that thinks completely differently? Jake felt a spark of hope. You mean Scout might have an advantage because he hunts in a way the target isn't prepared for? Exactly, Lisa said. Every creature at this academy relies on size, speed, or strength, but Scout relies on intelligence and patience. The simulation probably isn't designed to handle that. They talked for another hour, and Jake felt more confident with each passing minute. Scout was not just different from the other creatures. He was different in a way that might actually help him win. When Lisa finally went back to her room, Jake looked at Scout one more time. Tomorrow is going to be interesting, little guy, he said. I think I'm finally starting to understand what makes you special. The next morning, Jake woke up feeling nervous, but determined. He carefully moved Scout to a smaller travel terrarium that he could carry easily. Scout seemed calm, as if he understood that something important was happening. Connor met Jake and Lisa for breakfast, but none of them ate very much. Word about the challenge had spread through the entire academy. Everywhere they looked, alien students were talking excitedly and pointing at them. I heard some students are placing bets on how quickly the war beetle will win, Connor said quietly. Let them, Jake replied. They don't know Scout like I do now. As they walked toward Combat Arena 7, Jake saw that crowds of students were already gathering. This was clearly the biggest event that had happened at the academy in a long time. Professor Zolthanoon was waiting for them at the arena entrance. His crystal body was glowing brighter than usual, which Jake had learned meant he was excited or interested. Mr. Morrison, the professor said, I must admit I am curious to see how this challenge unfolds. It is most unusual to have such a small creature in our combat facilities. Scout might surprise you, Professor, Jake said. Professor Zolthanoon's pattern shifted to what Jake thought might be amusement. Indeed, surprises can be educational. Vextar arrived with his war beetle in a large armored container. The beetle was even more frightening than Jake remembered, with jaws that could snap through metal and acid dripping from its mandibles. Ready to lose, human? Vextar asked with confidence. Jake looked down at Scout, who was calmly exploring his travel terrarium with those intelligent eyes. We'll see, Jake replied. As they entered the arena, Jake realized that this challenge was about more than just Scout versus the war beetle. This was about proving that Earth's approach to evolution, creating smart, adaptable creatures instead of just big, strong ones, had value in the galaxy. Scout seemed to sense the importance of the moment. He positioned himself at the front of his terrarium, all 8 eyes alert and ready. The real test was about to begin. The combat arena was packed with more students than Jake had ever seen in one place. Every seat was filled, and more aliens stood in the aisles and along the walls. Jake could hear dozens of different languages as students talked excitedly about the upcoming challenge. Look at them all, Lisa whispered as she and Connor found seats in the viewing area. The whole academy is here. Jake stood at the edge of the arena floor, holding Scout's travel terrarium. His hands were shaking slightly, but Scout seemed perfectly calm inside. The little spider sat at the front of the container, looking out at the massive space they were about to enter. The arena itself was incredible. It was as big as several football fields and could be programmed to look like any environment imaginable. Right now it was empty and gray, waiting for Professor Zolthanoon to create the hunting simulation. Vextar stood on the opposite side of the arena with his war beetle. The huge insect was making angry clicking sounds and trying to bite through the bars of its container. Acid dripped from its jaws and sizzled when it hit the floor. Professor Zolthanoon floated to the center of the arena, his crystal body glowing bright enough for everyone to see. "Students of the Academy," he announced, his voice echoing through the space. "Today we witness an unusual challenge. Two very different creatures will compete in a hunting simulation to determine which approach to evolution creates the superior predator." The crowd made various sounds of excitement. Jake noticed that most of the alien students seemed to be cheering for Vextar. "The rules are simple," Professor Zolthanoon continued. "I will create a complex environment with multiple levels and hiding places. Within this environment will be a single target creature. The first hunter to successfully capture this target will be declared the winner." The professor's patterns shifted as he began programming the simulation. The target creature combines the most challenging aspects of predators from across the galaxy. It has the speed of Veloxian hunters, the camouflage abilities of Zephyrian light dancers, and the defensive capabilities of Krathari war beasts. Jake felt his stomach drop. The target sounded impossible to catch. Additionally, Professor Zolthanoon added, the target has been programmed with advanced escape behaviors. It will actively try to avoid capture using intelligence and cunning. The arena began to change around them. The gray walls disappeared, replaced by what looked like a dense jungle. Thick trees grew up from the floor, their branches creating multiple levels of platforms and walkways. Vines hung down like curtains, and strange glowing plants provided patches of light and shadow. Water features appeared throughout the environment, streams that bubbled and splashed, creating both sound cover and obstacles. Rock formations jutted up in irregular patterns, creating caves and hiding spots. The ceiling became a canopy of leaves that filtered the light into constantly shifting patterns. "Impressive," Jake heard Vextar say loudly. "But no environment will save the tiny spider from superior strength." Professor Zolthanoon activated another part of the simulation. In the center of the jungle, a creature materialized that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was about the size of a large dog, but it moved like liquid. Its body seemed to shift and change color to match whatever was behind it. Sometimes Jake could barely see it at all. "Hunters, enter the arena," Professor Zolthanoon commanded. Vextar opened his container and his war beetle charged out immediately. The massive insect was even more frightening in the jungle setting. It crashed through smaller plants and left a trail of acid-burned vegetation behind it. Jake carefully opened Scout's terrarium. The little spider stepped delicately onto Jake's hand and then onto his shoulder. Scout's 8 eyes moved in different directions as he took in the complex environment around them. "Okay, Scout," Jake whispered. "This is it. Show them what Earth creatures can do." Jake stepped into the jungle simulation. Immediately he felt like he was in a real forest. The air was warm and humid, and he could smell earth and growing things. Sound echoed strangely through the trees, making it hard to tell where different noises were coming from. The war beetle was already crashing through the jungle, leaving a path of destruction. Jake could hear it smashing through branches and clicking, its huge jaws. Vextar had programmed it to hunt by brute force, charging toward any movement or sound. Scout, meanwhile, did something completely different. He climbed down from Jake's shoulder and positioned himself on a nearby branch. Then, he became perfectly still. Jake almost asked what Scout was doing, but then he remembered what he had learned the night before. Scout was not going to chase the target. He was going to study it first. From their position on the branch, Jake could see most of the arena. The target creature was moving through the jungle, but it was not running randomly. It seemed to be following specific paths, staying near water sources and thick vegetation where it could hide more easily. Scout's head moved slightly as he tracked the target's movement. Jake realized that Scout was doing exactly what he had done with the fruit flies, learning the target's behavior patterns. The war beetle, on the other hand, was getting frustrated. It kept charging toward where it thought the target was, but by the time it arrived, the creature had moved somewhere else. The beetle's loud crashing approach gave the target plenty of warning to escape. Jake could hear Vextar shouting commands to his beetle from outside the arena, but the insect was too excited to listen. It was used to enemies that would stand and fight, not ones that disappeared and reappeared somewhere else. Scout made a small movement that caught Jake's attention. The spider had identified something, a pattern in the target's behavior that Jake could not see. Very carefully, Scout began moving through the trees. He did not climb down to the ground where the war beetle was thrashing around. Instead, he used the network of branches and vines to travel silently through the canopy. Jake followed as quietly as he could, staying below Scout and trying not to make any noise. He noticed that Scout was heading toward a specific area of the jungle, a place where several streams came together near some large rocks. As they got closer, Jake began to understand what Scout had figured out. The target creature was not moving, randomly after all. It was following a route that took it past water sources every few minutes. It needed to stay hydrated, which meant it had to visit certain spots regularly. Scout positioned himself on a branch that hung over one of these water sources. Then he waited. Jake held his breath as he watched. This was exactly like the fruit fly hunt, but on a much larger scale. Scout had identified the target's pattern and positioned himself where the creature would have to come. The war beetle was still crashing around on the far side of the jungle, getting more and more angry as it failed to catch anything. The sounds of its frustration echoed through the arena, making the watching students cheer and laugh. But Jake was focused entirely on Scout. The little spider had not moved for several minutes, but all 8 of his eyes were alert and tracking, something that Jake could not see yet. Then Jake saw a shimmer in the air near the water source. The target creature was approaching, using its camouflage to stay nearly invisible. It moved carefully, checking for threats before approaching the water. Scout saw it too, but he did not move yet. He waited until the creature was committed to drinking from the stream. Only when the target lowered its head to the water did Scout make his move. The little spider leaped from his branch with perfect timing and accuracy. His jump carried him exactly to where the target's head would be when he landed. The distance was incredible, more than 20 times Scout's body length. But his aim was perfect. Scout landed on the target creature's neck, right behind its head, where it could not reach him with its claws or teeth. The creature tried to shake him off, but Scout held on with all 8 legs. The target creature became fully visible as it thrashed around, trying to remove Scout. Jake could see it clearly now. It looked like a cross between a big cat and a lizard, with shimmering scales, that had been providing its camouflage. But Scout was not trying to hurt the creature. Instead, he had positioned himself at exactly the right spot to interfere with the target's nervous system. Jake remembered reading that some spiders could paralyze much larger prey with precisely placed bites. Within seconds, the target creature slowed down, then stopped moving entirely. It was not dead or seriously hurt, just temporarily paralyzed by Scout's perfectly placed bite. The arena fell completely silent. Professor Zalthanoon's voice echoed through the space. Target captured. Winner, Earth Representative Jake Morrison. And his jumping spider. The silence continued for another moment. Then the alien students erupted in sounds that Jake's translator could not even interpret. Some seemed shocked, others confused, and a few actually sounded impressed. Jake looked up at Scout, who was still sitting calmly on the paralyzed target creature. The little spider looked back at Jake with those intelligent eyes, as if to say, "Did you doubt me?" The silence in the arena stretched on for what felt like forever. Jake stood in the jungle simulation, looking up at Scout, who was still sitting calmly on the paralyzed target creature. The little spider seemed completely unbothered by the hundreds of alien eyes staring at him. Finally, one student in the crowd made a sound, then another. Within moments, the entire arena erupted in chaos as students from different species all tried to talk at once. Jake could not understand most of what they were saying, but he caught enough words to know they were all shocked. "Impossible," he heard a Krathari student shout. "How did something so small defeat the target?" called out a Veloxian. Professor Zalthanoon floated down into the arena, his crystal body pulsing with bright patterns that Jake had never seen before. The professor approached the paralyzed target creature and examined it carefully. "Fascinating," Professor Zalthanoon said, his musical voice filled with wonder. The spider has delivered a precise bite to the creature's central nervous system. The paralysis is temporary but complete. This required not just accuracy, but detailed knowledge of anatomy. Jake felt his heart swelling with pride as he watched Scout. The little spider had climbed down from the target creature and was now sitting on Jake's outstretched hand, cleaning his legs with his mouth parts like nothing unusual had happened. Vextar's war beetle was still thrashing around on the other side of the arena, trying to find the target that had already been captured. When Vextar realized what had happened, he commanded his beetle to return. The massive insect came crashing through the jungle, its jaws clicking angrily. Vextar himself entered the arena, his huge form casting shadows through the holographic trees. He walked over to where Jake stood with Scout and stared down at the tiny spider. "I do not understand," Vextar said in his deep, rumbling voice. "My war beetle is 10,000 times larger than your creature. It has armor that can stop energy blasts. It has jaws that can bite through steel. How did your spider succeed where my beetle failed?" Jake looked up at the towering alien warrior. A day ago, he would have been too scared to answer. But now, with Scout sitting calmly on his hand, Jake felt different. "Your beetle is very strong," Jake said respectfully. "But Scout is smart. He did not try to be bigger or stronger than the target. He studied it, learned its patterns, and used strategy instead of force." Vextar looked confused. "Strategy? It is just a tiny animal." Professor Zalthanoon approached them, still glowing with those strange new patterns. "Actually, Mr. Vexitar, I believe young Mr. Morrison is correct. I have been analyzing the arena recordings, and what I discovered is quite remarkable." The professor activated a holographic display that showed the hunt from the beginning. Jake could see Scout's movements traced in bright lines while the war beetle's path was shown in a different color. "Notice the difference in approach," Professor Zalthanoon explained to the growing crowd of students. "The Krathari war beetle used what we might call a search and destroy pattern. It moved quickly through the environment, checking every possible hiding spot by force. The display showed the war beetle's chaotic path as it crashed through the jungle, leaving destruction everywhere it went. The earth spider, however, used what appears to be a predict and position strategy," Professor Zalthanoon continued. "It spent the first several minutes simply observing the target's behavior from a safe distance. Jake watched the display show Scout sitting perfectly still while the target creature moved through its routine. Once the spider had identified the target's behavioral pattern, it moved to a strategic location and waited." Professor Zalthanoon said, "The attack itself took less than 2 seconds, but it was preceded by nearly 10 minutes of analysis and preparation." A Zephyrian student in the crowd called out, "But Professor, how can such a small brain perform that kind of analysis?" Professor Zalthanoon's patterns shifted to what Jake now recognized as excitement. "An excellent question, Morelands. It appears that Earth's evolution has produced something quite unique, a creature that maximizes cognitive efficiency rather than physical size." The professor floated closer to Jake and Scout. "May I examine your spider more closely, Mr. Morrison?" Jake nodded and held out his hand. Scout seemed comfortable with the attention and did not try to hide as Professor Zalthanoon activated various scanning devices. "Remarkable," the professor murmured as data appeared on his displays. "The neural density in this creature's brain is extraordinary. Its visual processing system is more complex than creatures 100 times its size. And look at this. It has dedicated brain regions for spatial reasoning and pattern recognition." More students were gathering around now, pushing closer to get a look at Scout. Jake noticed that they were no longer laughing or making jokes. Instead, they seemed genuinely curious and even impressed. A Veloxian student named Zixara, who had mocked humans during the first class, spoke up hesitantly. "Professor, does this mean that intelligence can be more effective than physical advantages?" "In certain situations, absolutely," Professor Zalthanoon replied. "Consider what happened here today. The target creature was specifically designed to counter the hunting methods we typically see in this academy. Brute force, overwhelming speed, and direct confrontation. But it was not prepared for a hunter that used patience and intelligence." Vextar had been listening to this discussion with a thoughtful expression on his scarred face. Finally, he knelt down so that he was closer to Jake's eye level. "Human Jake," Vexitar said formally. "I owe you an apology. I believed that strength was the only measure of worth. Your spider has shown me that I was wrong." Jake felt surprised by the sincerity in Vextar's voice. "Thank you, Vextar. But Scout is not trying to prove he's better than your war beetle. They're just different kinds of hunters." "Yes," Vextar said slowly. "Different. I think I am beginning to understand why the Galactic Council invited Earth to join us. Your species brings new ways of thinking that we had not considered." Professor Zalthanoon deactivated the jungle simulation, and the arena returned to its plain gray appearance. But the crowd of students did not disperse. Instead, they gathered around Jake, asking questions about Scout and about Earth. "How many different kinds of spiders does your planet have?" asked a Zephyrian student. "What other small creatures on Earth are intelligent like this?" wanted to know a Krathari. "Do all humans work together with other species like you do with your spider?" asked a Veloxian. Jake tried to answer all their questions, with Lisa and Connor joining him to help explain about Earth's incredible diversity of life. He told them about octopuses that could solve puzzles, about ravens that could use tools, about dolphins that had their own languages. "Your planet sounds amazing," said Zixara. "So many different types of intelligence working together." "That's exactly right," Jake said, looking down at Scout, who was still sitting contentedly on his hand. "On Earth, we learned that survival is not just about being the biggest or strongest. Sometimes it's about being smart, sometimes it's about working together, and sometimes it's about being patient and precise." Dean Morthak arrived in the arena as the crowd was finally beginning to break up. The ancient Zephyrian's patterns were more complex than Jake had ever seen them. "Mr. Morrison," Dean Morthak said, "I believe we owe Earth an apology. We assumed that physical prowess was the primary indicator of evolutionary success. Your spider has taught us that intelligence takes many forms." "Thank you, Dean Morthak," Jake replied. "But I hope this means that all of us can learn from each other. Scout is amazing, but so are all the creatures that the other students brought. We all have different strengths." Dean Morthak's patterns shifted to what Jake thought might be approval. "Wisdom beyond your years, young human. I believe this academy will benefit greatly from Earth's perspective." As the days passed, everything changed at the academy. Jake found himself invited to study groups with alien students who wanted to learn about Earth's approach to evolution. Professor Zalthanoon asked him to help design new courses that would explore intelligence-based hunting strategies. Most importantly, Scout became something of a celebrity. Students would often stop by Jake's room to watch the little spider hunt, amazed by his precision and planning. Scout seemed to enjoy the attention, often performing his most impressive jumps when he had an audience. One evening, as Jake was studying with Scout sitting on his desk, Lisa and Connor came to visit. "Can you believe how much things have changed?" Lisa asked. "A week ago, everyone thought we were a joke. Now half the academy wants to visit Earth to study our wildlife," Connor added with a grin. Jake looked down at Scout, who was examining a new puzzle toy that one of the Zephyrian students had made for him. The little spider was trying to figure out how to get to a fruit fly that was trapped inside a transparent maze. "I think Scout always knew he was special," Jake said. "He just needed the right opportunity to show everyone else." Scout solved the puzzle with a perfectly timed jump that surprised even Jake. As the little spider enjoyed his reward, Jake realized that this was what Earth brought to the galaxy. Not just strength or speed, but the patience to observe, the intelligence to plan, and the precision to succeed where others might fail.